She told me, "I think we should take a break," right before her ex moved back to town. I said, "Okay." For months later, she texted wanting to talk. I replied, "I'm seeing someone else now." She showed up at my door that night begging for a chance. I, 29M, never thought I'd be the type to plan revenge. But life has a way of teaching you lessons you never asked for. It started on a Tuesday evening in March. She came home from work with that look, the one where she's rehearsed something in her head a dozen times, but still can't meet my eyes. We'd been together for 3 years, living together for the last 18 months in our cozy apartment downtown. I was making dinner, something simple with pasta and chicken, when she dropped the bomb. She told me she thought we should take a break. Not a breakup, she was careful to clarify, just some space to figure things out. She said she felt overwhelmed with work and needed time to focus on herself. The words came out rehearsed, like she'd practiced them in the mirror. I stood there holding a wooden spoon, sauce still bubbling on the stove, and felt my world shift sideways. I asked her what brought this on so suddenly. She gave me vague answers about feeling suffocated and needing independence. Something about personal growth and finding herself again. The usual script people use when they want out, but don't want to be the villain. What she didn't mention, but what I found out 2 days later through mutual friends, was that her ex-boyfriend, the one from college she'd dated for 4 years, was moving back to town. Apparently, he'd gotten a job offer at a tech company downtown and would be arriving within the week. The timing was interesting, to say the least. I told her okay, just like that. I didn't fight, didn't beg, didn't even ask questions about the logistics. The look of surprise on her face was almost worth the knife in my chest. She'd clearly expected drama, tears, maybe some grand gesture to win her back. Instead, I turned off the stove, grabbed my keys, and told her I'd stay at my brother's place for a few days while she figured out what she wanted to do about the apartment. That night at my brother's house, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to be the pathetic ex-boyfriend waiting around for her to realize what she'd lost. I was going to disappear from her life so completely that when she finally came crawling back, and I knew she would, I'd be someone she didn't recognize. The next morning, I started planning my transformation. First, I blocked her on everything. Social media, messaging apps, even her phone number. I told our mutual friends I didn't want to hear anything about her, positive or negative. When they tried to give me updates anyway, I walked away. I became a ghost in her world. Then I focused on myself with an intensity that bordered on obsession. I've been talking about joining a gym for years, but never followed through. Within a week, I had a membership and a personal trainer. I threw myself into workouts with the same energy I'd previously reserved for video games and Netflix binges. I also enrolled in those evening business classes I'd been putting off. My job in marketing was stable but uninspiring, and I'd always talked about getting my MBA. Suddenly, I had all the time and motivation in the world. The physical changes came faster than I expected. Within 6 weeks, I'd lost 15 pounds and gained definition in places I forgot existed. The mental changes were even more dramatic. The combination of endorphins from exercise and accomplishment from academic success created a positive feedback loop that made me feel unstoppable. 2 months in, I met Sarah at a coffee shop near campus. She was studying for her master's in psychology, had short dark hair and green eyes that lit up when she laughed. We struck up a conversation about the terrible coffee shop music, and before I knew it, we'd been talking for 3 hours. Sarah was everything my ex wasn't. Direct where my ex was manipulative, confident where she was insecure, genuinely interested in my thoughts and opinions rather than just waiting for her turn to speak. When Sarah laughed at my jokes, it felt real. When she touched my arm during conversation, it sent electricity through my entire body. We started dating 2 weeks later. I made sure to be seen around town with Sarah. Not obviously, I wasn't posting relationship updates or making grand public displays. But I took her to the restaurants my ex and I used to frequent, the coffee shops where her friends might see us, the movie theater downtown where we'd had our first date years ago. Word travels fast in a city this size, especially when people are looking for gossip. I knew it would get back to her eventually. 3 months into my new life, I was a different person. I'd lost 25 pounds, gained muscle definition that made my clothes fit better, aced my first semester of business classes, and was in the early stages of what felt like a genuinely healthy relationship. My confidence had transformed from the quiet, accommodating guy who'd let his girlfriend walk all over him into someone who knew his worth and wasn't afraid to demand it. I carried myself differently, spoke with more authority, and stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. The revenge wasn't just about her anymore. It had become about proving to myself that I was capable of more than I'd ever imagined. For months and 2 weeks after she'd asked for that break, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It took me a moment to realize she must have gotten a new phone or was texting from someone else's device since I'd blocked her original number. The message was simple: "Can we talk?" I stared at that text for a long time. Part of me, the old me, wanted to respond immediately, to ask if she was okay, to offer to meet her wherever she wanted. But the new me, the one who'd spent 4 months rebuilding himself from the ground up, had a different response in mind. I waited 2 hours before replying. "I'm seeing someone else now." The response came back within minutes. She said she'd made a mistake, that she missed me, that she wanted to explain everything. She asked if we could meet for coffee, just to talk as friends. She promised she wouldn't take up much of my time. I didn't respond. That evening, I was at Sarah's apartment helping her study for an upcoming exam when my doorbell rang. Sarah offered to come with me, but I told her to stay put. Something in my gut told me who would be standing on the other side of that door. I was right. She looked terrible. Not in a dramatic, movie way, but in the real way people look when they haven't been sleeping well. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She was wearing an old sweatshirt I recognized from our time together, and her eyes were red-rimmed like she'd been crying recently. She asked if we could talk, and I told her this wasn't a good time. She said she knew about Sarah. Apparently, multiple people had mentioned seeing us together, and that she understood I'd moved on, but she needed to explain what had happened. The explanation was predictable. She and her ex had tried to rekindle things, but it hadn't worked out. He was different now, she said, not the person she remembered from college. They'd dated for 6 weeks before mutually deciding they were better as friends. She'd spent the last month thinking about what she'd lost and realized I was the best thing that had ever happened to her. She said she knew she'd hurt me and that she didn't deserve another chance, but she was willing to do whatever it took to earn back my trust. She'd go to therapy. She'd be completely transparent about everything. She'd prove that she'd learned from her mistakes. As she spoke, I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just a hollow feeling where all that pain and resentment had been living for months. Looking at her standing there, desperate and vulnerable, I realized that my transformation hadn't just been physical and professional. I'd fundamentally changed as a person, and the man standing in this doorway wasn't the same one she'd asked to take a break from 4 months ago. I told her I appreciated her coming by and that I hoped she'd find what she was looking for, but that chapter of my life was closed. I explained that I was happy now, genuinely happy, and that going backward felt impossible even if I'd wanted to. She started crying then, not the manipulative tears I remembered from our arguments, but real, desperate sobs. She said she'd ruined the best relationship she'd ever had for a fantasy that turned out to be nothing. She begged me to consider giving us another chance, even just as friends. I felt bad for her in that moment, but not bad enough to derail the life I'd built. I gently told her that I thought it would be better for both of us if we didn't stay in contact, and I wished her well before closing the door. When I got back to Sarah's apartment, she asked if everything was okay. I told her about the visit, and she listened without judgment or jealousy. She said she could tell it had been difficult, and she appreciated that I'd been honest with her about it. Then she went back to studying, trusting me to process whatever I needed to process without making it her problem. That's when I knew I'd found something real. Update 1. 3 weeks later, she tried again. This time through my brother, asking him to pass along a message about wanting to return some of my things she'd found in storage. My brother, who'd watched me transform over the past months, told her he'd pass along the message but suggested she donate anything she didn't want to keep. She also tried reaching out through 2 of our mutual friends, both of whom shut it down immediately. Apparently, word had gotten around about what had happened, and people weren't interested in helping her try to win me back. The final attempt came 6 weeks after her doorstep visit. I was at the gym, the same one where I'd started my transformation, when she appeared on the treadmill next to mine. She said it was a coincidence, that she'd just joined this gym, but the timing felt too convenient. She tried to make small talk about my workout routine and mentioned how good I looked. I kept my responses polite but brief, finished my run, and moved to a different section of the gym. She followed me there too, asking about my business classes and saying she'd heard I was doing well. Finally, I stopped what I was doing and asked her directly what she wanted. She said she missed our friendship and thought maybe we could start there. She promised she wasn't trying to get back together, just hoping we could be civil when we ran into each other around town. I told her I understood her perspective, but that I'd moved on completely and didn't think maintaining any kind of relationship would be healthy for either of us. I suggested she might want to consider finding a different gym if running into each other was going to be a problem. She got angry then, for the first time since this whole thing started. She said I was being cruel and that she deserved at least a chance to make amends. She accused me of punishing her forever for one mistake and said the person I'd become was cold and unforgiving. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had become colder, but I'd also become stronger, more confident, and genuinely happier than I'd been in years. If that made me cruel in her eyes, I could live with that. Update 2. 8 months after our original breakup, I proposed to Sarah. We were hiking on a trail outside the city, the same one where I'd spent countless hours walking and thinking during those first difficult weeks. Sarah had become not just my girlfriend, but my best friend, my biggest supporter, and the person who'd helped me become the best version of myself. The proposal wasn't elaborate, just the two of us, a simple ring, and words that came straight from my heart about how she'd helped me discover who I was meant to be. She said yes immediately, and we spent the rest of the day planning a future that felt bright and full of possibility. 2 days later, my brother called to tell me that she'd reached out to him again. Apparently, news of my engagement had made it through the social network, and she wanted him to pass along congratulations along with a request to meet for coffee to clear the air. My brother had told her congratulations weren't necessary and that I'd made my feelings about future contact clear. She'd persisted, saying she just wanted closure, but he'd ended the conversation there. Sarah and I discussed whether we should expect any further attempts at contact, especially around our wedding. We decided to be proactive and made sure our venue coordinator knew not to admit anyone who wasn't on our guest list, regardless of what story they might tell. Update 3. Our wedding was perfect. Small, intimate, surrounded by people who genuinely supported our relationship and wanted us to be happy. Sarah looked radiant. I felt like the luckiest man alive. And for the entire day, my ex-girlfriend didn't cross my mind once. 2 weeks later, we got back from our honeymoon to find a letter in our mailbox. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. The letter was long, 3 pages of small, cramped writing. She congratulated us on our marriage and said she was happy I'd found someone who made me so obviously content. She apologized again for how our relationship had ended and took full responsibility for the pain she'd caused. But the real purpose of the letter was to tell me that seeing me move on so completely had forced her to confront some difficult truths about herself. She'd started therapy and realized that her pattern of leaving relationships when they got serious was rooted in deeper issues she'd never addressed. She said watching me transform my life had inspired her to do the same. She'd gone back to school, started working with a counselor, and was learning to be comfortable with commitment and emotional intimacy. The letter ended with her saying she didn't expect a response and wouldn't contact us again, but that she wanted me to know my refusal to take her back had ultimately been the best thing that could have happened to her. I showed the letter to Sarah, and we talked about it over dinner. Sarah said she could hear genuine growth in the words, and that it sounded like my ex had finally learned the lessons she needed to learn. I agreed, but I also didn't feel any urge to respond or reach out. That chapter of my life was genuinely closed, and I was content to let it stay that way. A year later, I heard through mutual friends that she was engaged to someone new, not her college ex, but a guy she'd met in her graduate program. People said she seemed different, more grounded and self-aware. I was genuinely happy for her. Not because I still cared about her romantically, but because her growth meant my decision to walk away completely had been validated. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is refuse to enable their worst behaviors, even when they're begging you to do exactly that. Looking back now, I realize that the best revenge isn't making someone pay for hurting you. The best revenge is becoming so genuinely happy that their absence becomes irrelevant. When someone shows you they don't value what you bring to their life, the most powerful response isn't anger or punishment. It's building a life so fulfilling that you forget they ever mattered. Sarah and I have been married for 2 years now. We're expecting our first child in the spring. I finished my MBA with honors, and I got promoted to a senior position at my company. The life I built in the aftermath of that breakup has exceeded every dream I had when I was with my ex. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd taken her back that night she showed up at my door. But mostly, I'm just grateful I had the strength to choose myself instead. That's the real victory. Not that she came crawling back, but that when she did, I was already too far gone to care. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.